It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
And welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com. I'm Paul Dottino. Here's Matt Citak. We're going to be here for the next hour to talk New York Giants football with you. And, of course, any other NFL news items that you may want to throw our way. Our number is 201-939-4513. As always, the show is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. But, once again, we are going to do an opponent's training camp preview segment, as we have done for the last couple of weeks. Today, we talk about the Washington Commanders. Of course, they're in the NFC East. They will play the Giants twice this year, and Giants have had their way with the Commanders for most of the better part of the last decade. And we welcome a George Wallace, sports director at WTOP Radio in Washington, who was kind enough to give us some moments to talk about what we can expect from the Commanders this year. George, thanks for taking the time today. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys having me. Ready to go.
Well, we all know here in New York, and I'm sure the people in Washington know, that this has been, for the most part, a one-sided series for a while. So if you can, give me one or two reasons why the Commanders think they can turn the tide against the Giants this year.
Well, guys, look, I think first and foremost is everything is new down here. New coach, new GM, new quarterback, new energy. We saw it last year with the new ownership, and it's been over a year now since Dan Snyder left town. He's not coming back. So that's the biggest thing that everybody's so excited about down here. But I think that just kind of resetting everything, guys, basically half this roster is going to be new this year. So the new focus, and it starts, of course, with Jaden Daniels. We all know the number 2 overall pick. A lot of excitement around here for sure to see how he develops. So I think just the overall newness of everything, to be honest, is what is giving everybody the excitement and the positive outlook of the season. And look, it's going to take a while. Everybody knows that. But as you guys know, the NFL, things change quickly. So I think just the excitement down here, everybody's looking forward to seeing what is going to transpire in the field, and can't wait to get going next week.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Jaden Daniels. That's where I was going to start. How did he look throughout the spring practices? And I know the Giants and Commanders are scheduled to meet in week 2. Do you expect Daniels to be the starting quarterback when they meet?
I do, and I think that it's one of those things. Unless something crazy happens, guys, in the preseason and training camp, and Marcus Mariota just goes out there and lights it. I just have a hard time believing they're not going to start Jaden Daniels. It just, from what we saw in the spring, and again, keeping in mind it's helmets and shorts, we know that, and T-shirts in the spring, and everything is scripted fine, but just the energy that he brings, and just the way he's, for lack of a better way of putting it, the way he's taking command of this offense. And the coaches make a big deal about how quarterbacks can get in and out of the huddle. And we saw that with Jaden Daniels this spring, between the communication between he and Cliff Kingsbury, and just the way he was able to run things in OTAs and the mini camp, and players to a man saying that, look, this guy's here at 5:30 in the morning and he stays late, and he's determined and to make this work. And you can tell he has what it takes right now to put in the work. And of course, we'll see how it translates on the field. But I think this is the guy. You draft him number 2. You're giving him the first team reps. And from what we saw in the spring, to the untrained eye, of course, the way he releases the football, his decision making, going through the progressions. And he's going to, a lot of people comparing it to RG3 back in 2012. And Robert Griffin III, he was just looking to take off and run. Jaden Daniels knows that if he has to run, fine. But this guy is going to put the football where it needs to go. And I think Cliff Kingsbury is going to put him in situations to make him successful.
There is no doubt he's got a bunch of targets in the passing game between McLaurin. They drafted McCaffrey. got Dotson out there. Zach Ertz seems like he's been playing forever. He's landed in Washington. Okay, so they've got guys who can catch the ball, and I don't think anybody would dispute that. But I'm really curious about how they're going to distribute the ball to these running backs. We know that Brian Robinson has a lot of ability, but so does Austin Eckler, who comes over from the Chargers. And I'm just really intrigued by how that running back room kind of sorts itself out.
I am too, guys, and I tell you, it's been a big topic too as well. And Austin Eckler, very complimentary of Brian Robinson Jr. And of course, Eckler comes in and he says all the right things. But look, he can still play. He wants to prove that he can still play, and as a competitor, you want to hear that. But he also knows that they've got a really good 1-2 punch. Just look at some of the numbers. Kingsbury, when he had James Conner and Chase Edmonds back in Arizona, they had 20-some touchdowns and over 2,000 yards from scrimmage, the two of them. So it could work if Kingsbury, again, puts them in positions. And, again, I think that you're going to see that balance because of Jaden Daniels and how he's still going to be learning, getting his feet wet. When you have Eckler and Robinson, the big key, guys, is going to be the offensive line, is if they can, protect Daniels and open up these holes. But I think that the balance is where this needs to come in on this offense, because this team cannot lead the NFL in passing attempts like it did last year and come in dead last in rushing attempts under Eric Bieniemy. And I don't think that's going to be the case, but I think that if Kingsbury can put these guys in situations, that he'll be able to distribute the football.
So you brought up the offensive line. Paul and I, we've discussed at length since the end of last season, have the Giants had, the worst offensive line last year, but the Commanders were tied for the second worst, at least in terms of sacks allowed, with 65. Washington went out, added a couple of guys into the mix. Tyler Biadasz at center, Nick Allegretti, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's him.
And then brought back Cornelius Lucas, swing tackle. And all three of those guys will at least compete for spots on the starting lineup. So how big of an improvement do you expect the O-line to make this year?
I think they're going to be improved. And excuse me, they also brought in Brandon Coleman as well. So between he and Lucas at left tackle, I think that's going to be the biggest position for me. And, of course, protecting Daniel's blind side is that left tackle spot. So between Lucas and Brandon Coleman, we'll see how they play out. You mentioned Allegretti on the left side as well. He'll play guard, Biadasz, and then Sam Cosmi, who's just been a rock on that right side as well, and then Andrew Wiley probably on the right tackle. So I do expect them to be improved. We saw just how much of a disaster it was last year, as you mentioned. So it can't go anywhere but up, but I think they've made some additions. And I was having this conversation the other day with somebody. It also, keep in mind, and you guys know how it works throughout the summer, guys are going to get released, and maybe that left tackle, the starting left tackle, is not on the roster just yet. So they'll keep an eye on that, and I think Adam Peters is going to be very good at that, and his department, his scouting department, and how he's keeping an eye on the rest of the NFL. I think we've seen him already kind of put his stamp on this team, and I don't think it's done just yet.
Well, I'm sure that new head coach Dan Quinn, who is a defensive mind, is going to be smiling at a lot of the defensive players he's got in his lineup. The front four certainly has a lot of talent, but I'm just going to be right to the point here. Bobby Wagner, I mean, might as well bring back Chris Hanburger. He's so old. But somehow, some way, Bobby Wagner signed with Washington this year. Explain that one to me, please.
Isn't that great? Yeah, he's got that Seattle connection. And it's, what's funny is the fact that come in and everybody, he's kind of that veteran already in the locker room, and everybody's expecting him to anchor this defense. And it's going to be interesting to see, how he does fit in. I mean, he had 183 tackles, I think, last year for Seattle. So, he can still play, and we'll see, but he's going to be the anchor of this defense, and the familiarity, and they went right after him, and Dan Quinn has praised him this offseason. We'll see if he can hold up, but you're right. Between him and I'm anxious to see. I'm excited for Wagner, of course, then Frankie Lubo coming in also in that linebacker spot, and Jamin Davis. I mean, we saw Jamin Davis not really have much success under the Ron Rivera era. And guys, how funny is it? Rivera took a lot of slack for this. The guy played the linebacker position, but never really addressed it here in Washington. So everybody's kind of excited on this defensive staff now to go out and get guys like Luvu and Bobby Wagner, and we'll see how they hold up and how much Wagner can contribute.
Yeah, so sticking with Wagner for a second, no doubt that he's old, 34 years old, just turned 34. But what is it, 10 straight All-Pro selections, something like that.
Yeah.
Well, he's going to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, but still an All-Pro last year. But with that age and with, I guess, the depth that the Commanders now have at inside linebacker, do you expect Wagner to be an every down player for the Washington defense?
I do. I think at least so until he proves that I guess that he's not. But I do think that they're counting on him a lot, and I think players have kind of said that all throughout the spring. The coaching staff has been very impressed with him, and as you mentioned, I mean, you know what he kind of reminds me of, guys? He kind of reminds me of the London Fletcher when he kind of came here, right? You know, that veteran guy that just kind of came in here and anchored that defense. So we'll see how he holds up. But Fletcher was able to put in a few good years when he played here. So if he can hold up and you know, get the rest and not have to be relied on every down, then I think that they're going to be okay. But yeah, if the other guys around him don't step up, then we'll see how long he does. How long he holds up.
I got to feel, George, it's going to help. You got Payne and Allen still fortifying the inside of that defensive front, which is going to give Wagner a lot of opportunities to make plays. And Dorrance Armstrong comes over from Dallas. Clelin Ferrell, who I always liked when he came out of school, but never seemed to work out well for the Raiders. So there's a lot of talent there. I think my biggest concern, if I'm a Commanders fan, I just don't think very highly of the secondary.
Well, and that's a good point that you say that, because that is for me the biggest question mark. Just, you know, it's funny going over some of these numbers before camp. Last year, 8 interceptions total for the team, 9 total the year before, and then Dan Quinn, I saw a stat, Dallas had 17 last year alone. So yes, the secondary is the biggest question mark right now, and a lot of question marks about Emmanuel Forbes and how he's going to bounce back in year number 2. He took a big-time beating last year from the media, from the fans, from the coaching staff. Was he ready to play? He's come back with a whole new outlook, and we'll see. Derek Forrest, who didn't finish last season, is back. Benjamin St. Juste as well, the other cornerback. So we'll see. And then Quan Martin also out there in nickel. So we'll see how these guys kind of come together. But for me, to your point there, my biggest question when it's going into the season, the secondary, and then that left tackle position. But, yeah, secondary is definitely a big question mark for sure.
I just want to go back to the offense for one quick question. So we spoke about Jaden Daniels before, and, of course, he was one of the top quarterbacks in the draft. But what do you think of the fit between Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator?
I think it's going to be intriguing. I think it's going to be fun to watch. I think that it is a situation where Kingsbury has been successful. We had Kyler Murray in Arizona. You know, he's come from the college ranks, of course, last year. But I think that he is a guy, from everything that we've learned, I think, in the spring and heard and talked about, he is going to put Jaden Daniels in positions to succeed. And I think that he's going to tailor the offense to him. And I think that is a big plus, because around here we've seen offensive coordinators, we saw Eric Bieniemy last year come in and try and do his thing, and poor Sam Howell was throwing the football, 80 times a game. So I think that you're going to see Kingsbury and Daniels kind of try and get on the same page, and we've already seen it throughout the spring. And I'm very anxious to see how that dynamic works, but I think that Kingsbury open to adjusting things to fit his rookie quarterback, which I think you can't always say in the NFL.
All right, I know you got to run in a minute, George, so I'll ask you one final big-picture question. Dan Quinn now gets a second chance to be a head coach after the way things went in Atlanta, which I thought, for the most part, he did a really nice job there, but everybody always looks at what happened in the Super Bowl when they kind of got too ultra-conservative and blew it.
Right.
How much do you think he's learned from that? I'm sure you guys have asked him. How will things be better a second time given this opportunity?
Yeah, and you're right. That was one of the early questions, and I thought it was very interesting the way he answered it, saying that basically, if he had another chance, all the things that he kind of stepped back and tore everything down, self-evaluated. So I think that he is a guy that is very thankful to have another opportunity, and I think that he's anxious to prove to everybody that he has learned from that first that stint as a head coach. And don't forget, the other thing that's still in everybody's mind is the blowout loss, right, to the Packers in the playoffs last year as the defensive coordinator Dallas. So that's what kind of had everybody on edge around here when his name came up. But everything we've seen so far, just from the pre-practice drills, the competitive things that they're doing, the players saying how the meetings are, high energy meetings, and he's a high energy guy, and he's come in and he's put a lot on his coaches. He's kind of self-inclusive, leaning on the veterans, leaning on the team captains, leaning on his coaches. So I think that he is saying all the right things to talk about what he has learned and how he's going to go about things. But, of course, as you mentioned, it's going to be about what happens on the field. But I think if you see this team take a step forward, they're competitive. Jaden Daniels is exciting. The defense shows up. And you know who else we didn't talk about real quick, guys, is Joe Witt Jr. You talk about some energy in that guy. The way he talks to his players and he talks to us, you just want to start running through a wall for the guy. But I think that he's surrounding himself with the right coaches and the right people, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all translates on the field. But from everything we've seen so far, again, it's a small sample size, is that he may be in the right spot, and we'll see what happens.
I'll give you a quick heads up, George. You'll enjoy Larry Izzo, too, special teams coach. We had him up here for a while.
Okay.
He is a great dude with a lot of energy. That's George Wallace, sports director at WTOP Radio in Washington, giving us the lowdown on the Commanders. George, thanks so much for your time. I know you got to run. We appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks, George.
So, as we talked about with George, the Giants will play the Commanders in Week 2. That game is on the road down in D.C., and then Washington will come back here in week number 9 in November on the 3rd to play the Giants here at MetLife Stadium. And, I think it's a real interesting situation anytime somebody takes a quarterback so high in the first round. There's such intense pressure for that guy to start right away. So I liked your question about, hey, is he starting in week 2, or is there any chance in the world that they might spoon feed him and let Mariota start against the Giants? We got our answer.
Yeah, I mean, there were 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round this year. Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, from the start, everyone thought these two are the guys that will start week 1. Obviously, I guess it somewhat depended on, if Jaden Daniels somehow did not land in Washington, but I feel like everyone kind of knew he was going to end up there. But yeah, I mean, those two seem to be the most, I guess, NFL ready, or at least in Daniels' situation, it's sort of, do we throw Marcus Mariota out there, or, take a chance on just putting our number 2 overall pick right in there from the start? So I asked that question. I kind of expected what the answer would be, which is exactly what George told us. But I'm excited to see the Giants face off against Jaden Daniels in week 2. I mean, he was, other than Caleb Williams, he was my favorite prospect in this draft. And I'm interested. I don't think the talent around him is amazing, at least not this year. They have some players there. Terry McLaurin's great. Austin Eckler's still great. But I'm interested to see what he can do.
Well, the Commanders also have 2 question marks that actually parallel the Giants.
Yep.
They're not sure about their offensive line, and they're not sure about the lack of proven players in the secondary.
Oh, yeah.
So
those are the 2 biggest weaknesses for both
look
teams.
in the mirror,
last year.
Spider-Man, because really that's just a common issue with both of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, with Washington especially, their pass defense was the worst in the league last year, at least in terms of passing yards allowed. They ranked 32nd. The Giants weren't, that much better.
No, I actually kind of like the Giants secondary, to be honest, but there are definitely some unproven elements.
Oh, of course.
That we can't deny.
Without a doubt.
Can't deny that. There are unproven elements. I think it's going to be a good secondary, but the bulk of it is still unproven.
Agreed. But I do think that at least the young players that the Giants have in the secondary
have shown flashes.
Have a lot more upside than the guys in the Washington secondary.
Totally agree.
Like I do like the Jeremy Chin signing at safety this year, but he didn't show that much in Carolina. I think Dan Quinn might be able to unlock some of that potential that we saw, the very beginning of his career.
He was one of unfulfilled potential with the Panthers.
Of course. And, if there's one defensive coach that can get the most out of a player, Dan Quinn's got to be up pretty high on that list. But it's the guys around him that I just don't have that much confidence in.
I'm with you.
We'll see, though.
201-939-4513. The rest of the show is us and you here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Don't forget, you can find an archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at giants.com/podcasts. And I do want to remind folks right away, we want to get this out of the way quickly because I know a lot of people are still interested. You can run or walk with Giants legends. The Giants Foundation will host a 5K race and kids run presented by Quest on Saturday, September 7th at 9 a.m. here at MetLife Stadium. Net proceeds will benefit the Giants Foundation, and all participants will receive a commemorative T-shirt. After the race, you can stay for post-race festival and a good time with appearances by Giants legends and also a live DJ.
Also,
all right,
before we get to the calls, real quick.
Yeah.
At 2 p.m. today, there will be additional limited tickets available for training camp, for Giants training camp. The original release, I believe, was like last week, and the tickets sold out immediately.
They did very quickly.
So it's 12:51 now at 2 p.m. We're dropping some limited additional tickets. I don't know how much. So if you're really interested in come to training camp and you didn't get a ticket last time, go on to Giants.com/training camp at 2 p.m.
Training camp, of course, opening on the 24th. That is coming up on Wednesday, the first practice. Just to make it clear, folks, the rookies are already here. Okay, yes. They've already checked in this week, but they don't have any practice sessions. Tuesday coming up, the veterans have to check in, but they'll go through conditioning and then they'll get their some of the playbooks. They'll have to do the weigh-ins, make sure guys aren't overweight or underweight for that matter. And then the first actual practice, which isn't much of a practice, it's really T-shirts and shorts and helmets, and that's all it is on Wednesday the 24th. But that's the first time that all these guys will be able to get together on the field at the same time since the veteran minicamp, which was a little over a month or so ago. And so we're excited about it. We're looking forward to it. Our lines are now open, 201-939-4513. And it looks like we do have a caller on line 3, if I can only find his name.
I got you. It's Jay in Phoenix.
Thank you, Pearson. Jay, you're first on the program. Hello.
Hello. How you guys doing?
We're well. How are you?
How are you, Jay?
I'm doing great. So I was going to call about Hard Knocks and talk about Hard Knocks, but it's interesting, this week's list of 100 great Giants, I think it's 71 to 80 came out.
Yes.
Yep.
And I'm in my office at work. Well, I work from home, but I'm in my office, and I'm looking at a picture of Gary Reasons knocking the mouthpiece out of Humphrey in Denver.
Yes.
I know he was on the list this week. It was beautiful.
In the snow.
I still love that play.
Indeed.
In the snow. It was a great.
That photograph, and I can't remember the gentleman who took it. I think it might have been Jerry Pincus, who was one of the Giants' official photographers for years. That photograph won the Photograph of the Year that season by the NFL Hall of Fame.
Yeah, no, it's great. I actually liked Gary Reasons quite a bit when I was a little kid. The first football number I ever wore when I played tackle football was 55, and so.
See, for me, that would have been Brian Kelly. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I hear you. Anyway, about Hard Knocks, it's interesting to listen to folks outside of the Giants organization and outside of fans kind of criticize the organization. But I want people to understand, we're watching a 40-minute episode of something that took weeks and hours of meetings and so much time to get to that point.
How about months?
Well, there's months too. I'm sorry. Yeah, each episode, right? It's just months. So, anyways, I've really enjoyed it. I think, a couple of the things that I've really liked is seeing. I think Brian Dable and Shane Bowen are a nice combination. They seem to enjoy each other, but again, these are little clippets. You see these little interactions between them, but they seem to genuinely enjoy each other. I've really liked seeing. We needed closure on Saquon as a fan base. And, yeah, maybe people think, okay, well, we shouldn't have let our best player go. But really, how many years until we're thinking we've got an Ezekiel Elliott contract and we want him gone? And I hate that he went to the Eagles, but I think I'd rather have that running game versus the superstar running back. And I think we're going to get to at least see what the Giants are. See the offense they built. So I thought that was kind of cool. About DJ, I'm surprised what they're showing, and I think again they're giving us teasers to show, to create a little bit of interest and controversy. But I really think even Daniel Jones has to realize, look, this organization's most important position is quarterback. We've paid you. We believe in you. We want you to do it. But you've been hurt. We have to protect ourselves. So the fact that they're considering trades, and they were at the draft, I don't think should be so, polarizing or so damaging to the egos in the room. Because, again, the Giants have to prepare for the future. I mean, he's been hurt. I want DJ to succeed more than almost anybody. But if he doesn't, if he gets hurt again, we need to have a backup plan. So.
I appreciate the phone call.
Oh, real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Throw on two more things.
You made some very clear statements that I don't think anybody would disagree with. I don't know that there was any reason for us to comment other than let you go. So go ahead. You're doing very well so far. I don't know if you've ever called us before, but you're doing very well.
I got two more then. So the Joe Shane and John Mara, I have over the years you hear that John Mara's a meddler. I think we just saw, and we've seen throughout this whole experience, that John Mara trusts his guys. Mm-hmm. And if anybody on planet Earth thinks, if you own a billion-dollar business, that the owner of that business can't have an opinion and can't express it to the people who work for him, you're a bunch of morons. I mean, how do you not understand? That's how the world works.
Yeah.
And John Mara, I think, is, if I look at myself and I'm in Joe Shane's seat, and in my current role, if my boss came in and said, I'm not going to sleep tonight if we don't make this happen, I don't think I'd have a job the next day. But the fact that Joe Shane does shows you that this is not some archaic dinosaur leadership that we have. These are guys who understand football, and they're trusting the guys they put into place, which I really respect.
Jay, I want to respond to that particular comment for a very specific reason. Okay, I'm in my 42nd season now of covering this franchise and this organization, so I've seen it all. And I will tell you, there is nobody who cares more about wins and losses than the Mara family. And the Tisch family, to be frank with you as well. They're half owners of this franchise too. But the Mara family in particular, because this is the family business, okay? This isn't just a job. This is not a corporation that some big conglomerate has as one of its 5 or 6 entities because they've got a huge portfolio of different things that they're dabbling into. This is the family business. If you were working at a job where you had to be in control and you had to be at the head of the table of the business that your grandfather passed to your father and your uncle and then passed down to you, don't you think it would be a gut punch with every single loss? It boggles my mind how many fans out there who have become so disenfranchised by some of the frustrations and the losses of the last decade or so will take shots at ownership here. Anybody can make mistakes, but trust me, this ownership cares about wins and losses every weekend more than any other ownership in the National Football League. Believe me, I see it every day. So I appreciate your comment about ownership.
Yeah.
Because if that's one thing that Hard Knocks has shown people, I hope that's it.
Yeah, and Paul, I thought that would get you fired up. That's why I said it.
There you did. Oh, of course.
And then last thing, real quick, I just want to go on record. It might look ugly. It might not be the prettiest thing you've ever seen, but I think that Brian Dable could hit a 7-second 40-yard dash. So I'll leave with that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jay. We'll let Coach know about that. He's got one person out there who's willing to put some shackles on him making the time that was requested. 201-939-4513. Phone lines are open. We'll be here for another half hour or so on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Matt, I think, one of the things that I've heard about, and I don't want to get too much into the Hard Knocks conversation, because everybody's already kind of hammered it out everywhere else. But I will say this. One of the things that I put up online the other day, and it doesn't have to do with the Giants in particular, but I think every fan out there goes through hand-wringing and consternation about how is their team going to get better. And shouldn't they get that guy? And can't they trade that guy? And can't they sign that guy? And a lot of fans think it's as easy as, just logging on to your favorite fantasy football site and pressing a couple of buttons. One thing that this show has shown us all is that the front office, they're people too. And when that clock strikes for the opening of free agency, they're sitting there in the office and they've got consternation, they've got stress, they've got sweaty palms, they're in agony. You heard Joe Schoen talk about the numbers of hours where his heart was stressed out. I guess it was on his watch.
Yep.
And it said that, he was like mega stressed. Okay? Don't think it's that easy to sign a player, to trade for a player, or to draft a player. It's not that easy, folks. This is a very difficult job. No, it's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. But this is a job that requires a tremendous amount of intestinal fortitude, manpower, hours, expense, and with so much on the line, the agony that these guys go through when they're doing contract negotiations, trying to make a trade, trying to land a free agent. They're human beings, man. They bleed just like you and me. And I hope that people have at least seen some of that in Hard Knocks, because that, I'm sure, goes on in every front office around the league. So I don't want to make this a Giants comment. But I hope that they've at least pulled back the curtain on an NFL front office so that fans out there who just think playing fantasy football is easy and you guys wring your hands a little bit and maybe one night you can't sleep because you're worried about trading your 4th-round draft pick to move up in the draft and get your quarterback 2 or whatever the hell you're trying to do. Well, guess what? It's a hell of a lot worse in the real world, folks. And these front offices go through hell.
Yeah, they really do. I mean, what we've seen in the first 3 episodes of Hard Knocks is a small fraction of the actual hard work and time put in by every member of the front office. I mean, we're used to watching Hard Knocks, the training camp version, where each episode kind of spans the time frame of 1 week of the preseason or training camp. This is basically one episode is like a month of the offseason when there are so many different things going on. Joe Schoen and the whole front office are juggling so many different balls at once, trying to get prepared for the start of free agency, for the draft, for spring practices, for everything. They're only showing on Hard Knocks a very, very small fraction of what is actually being done by the front office. I mean, separate from the actual Hard Knocks, there's a Hard Knocks podcast that the NFL has put together. Peter Schrager hosts. And I saw this because Joe Schoen at least was on this last episode.
Yes, he
that
was.
got released, yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And something that they did not even show in this past Hard Knocks episode is the whole trade for Brian Burns. We saw, a little bit of it in the first episode.
It seemed easy, didn't it?
Yeah. We saw Dan Morgan and Joe Schoen first talking about it at the Senior Bowl. Then in the second episode, we saw Joe Schoen talking to Brian Dable and Shane Bowen at the Combine. And then this last episode, it seemed like, snap of a finger, the trade was done. Joe, there was that one scene where Joe said, we're waiting 5-6 hours for Dan Morgan to get back to us.
How about that agony, right?
Yeah, sitting there just waiting. But one thing that wasn't even shown in the Hard Knocks, which Joe said in this podcast yesterday with Peter Schrager, is that Kevin Abrams, who's, been commended as the salary cap guy for the Giants and in the front office, he was up all night the night before free agency, working out the details of a possible extension with Brian Burns' agent and his people. And they didn't even know if a trade was actually going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
He said that Abrams was up until 3-4 in the morning hammering out the details of a contract that they did not even know if any of it would actually come to fruition. Because at that point, the Giants and Panthers still hadn't actually agreed to a trade. That was just one detail I found that kind of shows how much hard work that these guys in the front office put in. And a lot of the time, we heard about that situation because obviously the Brian Burns trade went through, but it made me think, how many times do you think Kevin Abrams, let's just say in particular, how many times do you think he hammered out contract details with a player from another team just for the trade to fall apart? And we just never heard about it.
Sure.
There's no way that was the first time that Abrams has, done something like that before. So yeah, I give my tip my hat to everyone in the front office. As you said, this Hard Knocks is sort of showing, like, unveiling what's behind the curtain, something that we have never seen before, other than, snippets in, like, Giants life. But those are 20-minute episodes.
We've known a lot about this stuff because we're in the building.
Yes,
but for the
your
fans,
average fan,
for the fans to be able to see that, because all the other Hard Knocks were always training camp or in season.
Yep.
Remember, Ernie Accorsi, okay, when he was still the Giants general manager, he used to tell us all the time, you folks don't understand. The hardest part of this job is the off season, because as general manager, that's when I've got to do all of my work. There's very little I can do once the season starts. Very little.
Yeah.
He was like, that's it. They got to maybe renegotiate a deal, maybe help the scouts out a little bit with trying to, sign a particular guy because somebody else got hurt. Maybe they want to extend somebody. But it's very little. Ernie used to say, the most of my job is done by opening day. The off season is torture.
Joe has said that himself since he came here to East Rutherford. He said once the season starts, he's not like, kicking his feet up on the table and relaxing, but the hard part of his job is done. Then it turns to Brian Daboll. He is the one that steps up then and has to get the Giants through the season, of course.
So that to me is the one general perspective or message that I hope fans take away from Hard Knocks. Not necessarily the little minutia things, and every writer out there and every fan out there wants to analyze every little 5-word sentence that's been clipped in the show and think that they mean much more than they do. And they want to create a narrative and a storyline after this one little snippet that came on the screen. Okay, go ahead. Waste your time with that garbage. That's fine. You need to do that? Do that. Maybe you got nothing better to do with your lives. I get that. But for me, I truly hope that you guys have at least gotten an understanding at how a real front office agonizes over an incredibly difficult job. That's what I hope. 201-939-4513 here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Ryan from Illinois is on line 1. You're next on the show. Hello.
Hey, guys. How are we doing today?
Hi.
Hey, Ryan.
I was going to ask, well, firstly, I want to say that I respect both of your guys' opinions and viewpoints, and in a way that, both of you are very, very different ways at evaluating football, and that's perfectly fine. But I think it's interesting in the last maybe month or two, it's been revealed to me that Pro Football Focus actually had a little bit of history with the Giants' history, and especially with Tom Coughlin. And so sometimes I do struggle with, it seems like when Pro Football Focus is brought up, it's a very, like, a controversial element, and Paul, I feel like you're very against it, and Matt, you're more in support because of the analytics element. Is there something that is, just really, something that I'm missing? Because it seems like Pro Football Focus had a decent history, especially with the Giants organization. Would you guys not agree?
Most of the organizations in the league, if not all of them, subscribe to their data. Now, the data, which is snap count, positional location on the field, that type of stuff is absolutely valuable to everybody. I absolutely agree with that. Because, actual factual data, yeah, I absolutely see, because, it takes a lot of time to do snap counts and to do positional locations on the field and stuff of that nature. So do I think that some of their raw data is valuable? Yes, I do. I know teams that would not give you 2 cents for their grades or their analysis, but they will value their raw data. That's the school that I come from.
No, I agree with you. I like, referencing PFF, and I reference it on Giants.com quite often, but I've kind of tried at least the last year, 18 months to limit it to, as you said, just the pure statistics that PFF are providing, because they really do. They give you more than just, your average box score.
Well, there are more categories.
There are way more categories. They really go into the analytics of the game, and I do think that those are valuable. I agree that when it comes to their grades,
all you got to do is listen to J.J. Watt.
Those you got to look at with a grain of salt. And in terms of, their analysis, the different writers they have, that's just like any other media outlet, in my opinion, which, some people like some media outlets and dislike others, and other people will dislike some and like the others. So in that sense, I agree with you in that, it's PFF, while they do provide analytics and data, they are somewhat of a media outlet as well. So I personally like some of the people on PFF, some of the PFF's writers more than others. I'll reference some more than others. But yeah, at the end of the day, other than like the pure data and analytics, the other stuff, you definitely have to, look at it with a little grain of salt.
In other words, if you're going to come at me with data, I'll listen to the data if you want to give me some data. But if you're coming at me, and I'll get a lot of people go at me on Twitter or come at me on this program and say, well, PFF graded him 89.5. That's the best way not to catch my attention, because the grades, no, that's hollow stuff. That's hollow stuff. That's just subjective by somebody who is God knows where, thinking that they know more about what's going on than people who are here in the building and who actually are in the locker room, on the practice field, and have watched every single play and have a legitimate knowledge as to what's going on.
Would you not ever say that their comparative values for different players do create a system that can at least be you can actually put numbers to it. So I understand that the value, where you think one player is versus another, could actually still give some element of importance.
There are too many variables. There's too many variables that a supposed grader does not understand or know that make an outsider's grading system relatively bogus, to be quite frank with you. And I can tell you that because I won't even give you the number of times that I've talked to a coach and asked them about how a certain player graded out in a certain game, and the grade is about 5 miles different than what the PFF grade was. And that's why J.J. Watt got on ESPN and absolutely trashed them and said players have nothing to do with their grades, that they're totally bogus. I mean, there are a lot of people in the league who feel that way.
Story, that Mike Zimmer story about what was it, maybe Eric Kendricks or something like that.
I don't know about the Mike Zimmer story, but anyway, that's about as. I mean, I don't know how else to answer your. I mean, it's fair, and I appreciate the question, because a lot of people, especially people who are lazy. And a lot of media folks are very lazy, and they'll just call up the site, see the grade, and use that as the basis for their argument or their narrative. Well, how about you learn something about football and figure it out on your own instead of just lifting somebody's shallow grade? That's how I see it.
That's totally fair.
Have a great day, my friend. Be good.
I just found it interesting that it went to Giants history, and so I wanted to talk about all Giants history. You have a good day.
All right, you too now.
Thank you.
201-939-4513. One of the things I wanted to mention, and we talked about this the other day with Howard, I don't know which of the days, and we'll have to find out which of the days those extra tickets are available for training camp. But folks, if you get a chance, and if there are any available, and again, I don't know which ones they are going to put up, the dual practices against the Lions are going to be really, really valuable.
Monday, August 5th, and Tuesday, August 6th.
Bingo. I can't wait. And, because when the Giants were out in Detroit last year, and John and I have talked about this, to see Hutchinson, maybe go up against both of the tackles at different times during the drills, there's some value there. I mean, that's going to be even better than seeing whatever we're seeing when they're going in-house against their own guys. Dan Campbell, I don't want to say that he was taking it more seriously than other coaches I've seen in the past, but let's just say there was a purpose when his team went out there in Detroit last year and scrimmaged with the Giants for those 2 days. They meant business.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were both there. We saw, especially on that first day, I mean, there is no doubt about it. that first joint practice last year, the Lions straight up outplayed the Giants.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt.
And it wasn't even close.
Now, in the drills that first day, the Giants' offensive line did well against the Lions' defensive line.
Yeah.
Because I had watched the one-on-one drills. Giants did really well there. But then when they got out onto the field and did the team drills, the Lions owned the day.
They did. And I will say that was day one. Day two was incredibly even.
Yep.
No Giants bias here. Like watching it from a pure third-person perspective, the second day of joint practices was very even when it came to the team drills. The Giants scored some on the Lions scored some on the Giants. It was very even. But generally speaking, just about joint practices, I mean, coaches around the NFL will tell you that those joint practices, they're only a handful each summer, and not every team even does it, but those are potentially even more valuable than the preseason games because this is your starters are getting more reps against their starters, one-on-ones, the iron sharpens iron that, we see in the Giants only practices, but it's 100% different when you're going up against a different opponent. And especially after, 2+ weeks of only going up against your own teammates, this is the first chance that the Giants are going to have to go against another team leading up to that first preseason game.
What's interesting is that every time the Giants have had a couple of days of these joint practices, the other team seems to get the better of them the first time. It happened years ago when the Giants went to Cincinnati. It happened a few years ago when the Giants went to Cleveland. Same thing happened. First day, the Giants did not do well. Second day was much, much better. And as you mentioned last year, I thought you could call it a draw in Detroit on day two.
Yeah.
But day one, same thing happened in New England a few years ago when they went up to Foxborough. Day one, Patriots clearly ruled the day. Day two was much more even. It's a pattern that I've seen now every time that I have been to joint practices with the Giants and another team during camp. Now, they did have that one a couple of years back where they had the Jets up here for one practice.
Yep.
I thought the Giants won that day, but it was only one.
Yeah.
It wasn't a 2-day combo. I don't know why that's happened. Is it a coincidence? I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to be very interested to see how these 2 days play out.
Oh, me too. I mean, my personal guess, and this is based off of just what I saw with my own eyes, is that on day one of those joint practices last year, I think maybe the Giants weren't quite expecting Dan Campbell and his team to come out with as much fire as they did. I mean, they were going 150% on that first day of practices. And I think, not that the Giants obviously weren't putting in full effort, because they were, but I think just how much energy that the Lions brought to the practice field that day might have taken aback the Giants. I will say this year, I don't expect the same thing to happen. I think based on what happened last year and what the team can now expect, because they're going up against the same Lions team as last year in these two joint practices, I think they're going to come out and know what to expect from their opponent. And I think that first joint practice is going to be a lot more even than the first day we saw last year and the first day we saw of the joint practices the last couple of years that you mentioned.
Well, we know that Dan Campbell is as gritty as they come.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's a former Giant, and I've always thought, to be honest with you folks, he was going to be a terrific head coach. And it would not surprise me if at some point in his career he winds up coaching here. It really would not surprise me at all.
I don't know if Detroit's ever going to let him leave.
Well, he's got a lot of years of coaching ahead of him.
That's true.
I mean, and coaches in this league, they don't usually last more than a decade, even if they win.
He seems to be a perfect fit for Detroit, though. In that city.
You wouldn't be a bad fit here one day. Down the road, many years down the road, whenever that happens. Again, it's just, the league is not full of Mike Tomlins that seem to stay around forever. Okay? But, this is a guy who said, we're going to bite their kneecaps off at one point.
Yep.
So he is as gritty and as hardcore and hard-nosed as they come as a head coach. And his team reflected that. I mean, that's how he's actually had them on the ascent as well. I mean, this should not have surprised anybody.
No.
So I think that's why it's a good test for the Giants to have them come here this year as a reciprocal, because we're going to find out if not in the first week or two when the Giants are kind of trying to feel their way through things. We'll find out when the Lions get here. That's going to be a really good litmus test. We're going to see some real gumption, some real feistiness, I think, when those Lions come here to East Rutherford.
I mean, anytime there's a joint practice, you see the feistiness that you're mentioning.
Well, especially out of Dan Campbell's team.
Yeah, no, for sure. I meant more from the Giants.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah. Well,
I mean, obviously, the last couple of years, at least since I've been, this is going into my 6th season with the Giants. There have been some scuffles, we'll call it, between Giants players themselves at training camp, but it's these joint practices when they're going up against another team that I feel like you see it a little more often. Them getting into each other's face, chirping a little bit more after the play than you see when it's just teammates going up against each other.
I like to call that little sandpaper between two teams. Little sandpaper, little roughhousing there going on sometimes, and it can happen.
But yeah, I agree with you that would be the first big litmus test for this Giants team, how they perform in those joint practices. I mean, we see it every year in the preseason games themselves. The starters don't play that much, especially the first preseason game, which is when the Giants and Lions will be playing this next month. What the offensive starters might play a series, maybe 2.
Yeah.
It's not going to be much more than that. Joint practices, it's 2 hours each day. Obviously not all team drills, but individual drills and team drills make up a good portion of those 2-hour periods each day. And that is going to be Giant starters going up against Detroit starters. So that will be a very good first litmus test to see just how big of a jump the 2024 Giants can make from last year.
See, without knowing anything, and I want to make sure this is very clear, this is strictly an opinion. This is not based on any information from anybody in the building. It would not surprise me if that's where you see Daniel Jones get his summer work, during the joint practice sessions as opposed to the preseason games, because coaches like to talk about how they can control the safety of their own players, especially their quarterbacks, during these joint practices.
So you don't think he's going to play at all in the preseason?
I would not be shocked.
I'd be a little surprised by that.
And that's okay, because
I don't think he's going to play extensively in the preseason, but given
one series,
but given the fact that he hasn't played since week 8, and even prior to that he missed 3 straight games before then. So really, let's call it week 4 was the last time we really saw him out there for
I will say
a long time.
Maybe he'll play a series in one game, but I don't think there's going to be much more than that. I'd be very surprised. Maybe a series. That I saw how the Giants delineated snaps last year, and I think that they probably feel a lot safer with him in the joint practices than they do the preseason games. And knowing that, they want to give him every chance to be healthy and available in week 1 without any possible issues getting in the way, I think they're going to have the reins really tight on him. I really do. But that's speculation.
Yeah.
Folks, we know nothing about what they're going to do yet. It's too premature.
Yeah, no, you might end up being right. I think we don't know yet what Brian Daboll and the whole coaching staff's philosophy is going to be, just in terms of like all the starters with playing time in the preseason. We don't know, because last year the starters did not play that much.
Brian showed us last year, now unless things change, but he showed us last year, and even in his first year, he was very restrictive on letting his regulars take preseason snaps.
He was. But we have, as you said, it's too early to tell. We have no idea if he plans on implementing that same strategy for year 3 or if he's going to switch things up. I mean, if he decides as an overall philosophy that he doesn't really want the starters playing that much in the preseason, then yes, then I'll agree with you. I don't think Daniel Jones will play more than maybe a series or 2 in between the 3 preseason games. And I think it helps, as you mentioned, that they do have 3 total joint practices, 2 with the Lions and then 1 later in the summer with the Jets.
Right.
And as you said, it definitely is more of a controlled environment. So with a quarterback coming off a torn ACL, that could be where they they think he is better off getting practice reps. But I think we just have to wait and see what Brian Daboll decides to do as the philosophy for all of his starters in the preseason first. That will obviously give us a very strong tell of what the plan might be for Daniel Jones.
Well, this is year 3, okay, of the Daboll regime, and he still has not told us if he's made a decision yet as to who will call the plays. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But if he does, and he's certainly been doing a lot of it during the course of the offseason, I wonder how much that comes into play with his decision-making process, knowing that if he does take over and does implement some types of tweaks to the offense, are there certain guys he wants to see in certain situations where he says, hey, I need to see this in a preseason game? That could factor into his decision.
Yeah, that is actually a very good and interesting point. The last 2 years playing in, Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka's offense, Daniel Jones has had Mike Kafka calling the plays and in his ear. Obviously, Brian Daboll's on the headset as well, but if Brian Daboll does decide that he's going to be the play caller, which, as you mentioned, he did do throughout the spring, but Daniel Jones wasn't on the field during team drills in the spring. He didn't do any 11-on-11s. So that the preseason could be the first time that Brian Daboll gets to really get into Daniel Jones' ear in a game setting.
Might be.
So that's a point towards, potentially Daniel Jones
That's
getting
why I say
a little bit of action.
There could be a little leeway there.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point.
It intrigues me because I don't have a concrete answer as we sit here. I know what I think they're going to do, but I could also understand the logic.
Yeah, I could understand the logic both ways. I do think we'll get a pretty good sense of how Brian Daboll plans on treating, training camp in the preseason when he talks to the media next week. So that's next Wednesday. He will be speaking to the media. I think that will, shed some light on what he's not going to give away his, entire strategy for training camp in the preseason, but I'm sure he will give us something that will give us at least somewhat of an idea of what his plan is.
Joe Shane also will talk to the media next Wednesday, and I'm sure a lot of those questions will be Hard Knocks questions.
Great.
Why? Well, you know where they're going to go.
I know, but it's just it's the start of training camp. The focus should be on the season, training camp, and the season itself. There shouldn't be questions about Saquon and things that happened months earlier. It's just a waste of time.
There are some people who can't let that stuff go.
No, I know, and you're right and
that's what they're going to do.
100%, that will be a good chunk of the questions Joe Shane gets, but it's silly. You don't get that many. The media doesn't get that many opportunities to speak to the GM and to waste it on questions about things that happened months and months ago that don't matter anymore. It's kind of dumb.
All right. Got to make these final announcements. We didn't do it before, so let me finish it up. The Giants Huddle podcast, long-form interviews with Giants and league personnel. Don't forget, you can get it on your favorite podcast platforms or go to giants.com/podcasts. Leave a really good review on Apple because that way we know that you like the show. Giants season ticket memberships are now available for 2024. To learn more about exclusive member benefits all year round, go to giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And also the Giants official connected TV streaming app is available for free with highlights and on-demand video. It is on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, for a live program, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time for 1 hour of Big Blue Kickoff Live. We will be talking about the Dallas Cowboys. I believe that is the last preview of our off-season training camp outlook as we continue to seek the opponents or seek through the possibilities that the Giants are going to face this year on the 2024 schedule. So for Matt Citak, I'm Paul Dottino. That'll do it on Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. We'll see you next time.